Who is called wise? He who can discriminate between the real and unreal. What is to be feared? To become possessed by your own wealth. What deludes a man like an intoxicating drink? Attachment to the objects of the senses. Who is a loser? He who is proud. What is the most difficult task for a man? To keep his mind under constant control. Who is bound? He who is attached to worldliness. Who is free? He who is dispassionate. What is the gate to hell? Lust. Who lives in happiness? He who has attained samadhi. Who is awake? He who discriminates between right and wrong. How can one be liberated? By attaining the knowledge of Brahman. Even though he dwells in the body, he is eternally free. The illumined soul lives eternally conscious of his oneness with Brahman. Who are our enemies? Our sense organ when they are uncontrolled. Who are our friends? Our sense organs when they are controlled. Who is poor? He who is greedy. Who is blind? He who is lustful. Who has overcome the world? He who has conquered his own mind. Who is poor? He who is not contented. Who is awake? He who practices discrimination. Who is asleep? He who lives in ignorance. Who is a friend? He who prevents another from doing evil. What is man's best ornament? His good character. These are excerpts from the end of Adi Shankara's book, Crest Jewel of Discrimination, where he raises and answers important questions. The section is called Prasna Uttara Malika, a garland of questions and answers. Welcome to episode 50. Thanks for being here. If you found value in my work, please consider supporting it on Substack or on Patreon. Let's get into Adi Shankara. Adi Shankara, a towering figure in Indian philosophy and the exponent of Advaita Vedanta or non-dualism Hinduism. His seminal work is Crest Jewel of Discrimination, or otherwise known Vivekachudamani, remains the most crucial text for Advaita Vedanta. Adi Shankara is believed to have lived in the 8th century. His birth is traditionally placed in Kerala, India. And the main theme of this book, as we read in the excerpt, is achieving self-realization, liberation. Shankara's teaching begins with a powerful assertion, and I quote, "Brahman is real, the universe is unreal. A firm conviction that is so is called discrimination between the external and the non-external." This statement encapsulates the heart of Advaita Vedanta. The world we experience with our senses, according to Shankara, is an illusion, otherwise is known as Maya, and only Brahman, the ultimate reality, is real. And this is a recurring theme within many of the texts that we've looked at and other texts that I haven't done episodes on yet, one of which is Plato's Republic, Book 7, when Socrates discusses the cave. And the cave is an analogy about the philosopher finding liberation from the world of senses by coming into contact with the dazzling radiance of the eternal world of mind. When I was studying Crest Jewel Discrimination, it reminded me of the cave and other discussions in Plato. For example, the 3 elements of the soul, the human soul, the man, lion, and monster that exists within us, and how the man should be the one who tames the lion and the monster. My point here is that there's a convergence that takes place among some of these great works, and that's why we continue to look at texts from of old, because there is a tremendous amount of wisdom that is needed in our day and age. Now, returning back to Shankara, the question is, how do we, living in the midst of this world, move beyond the illusions of the senses to perceive the truth of Brahman, the ultimate reality, or to use Platonic terminology, the eternal world, the idea of the forms? Shankara answers this question by laying out a path for his readers, and that is first discrimination, renunciation, and self-discipline. And so the first question is, why are we so bound to this world that is unreal or illusory? Shankara repeatedly points to ignorance as the root cause of human suffering and our bondage. Right? It's ignorance that leads us to identify with our body, our thoughts, and our senses, which, according to him, are ephemeral. They're fleeting, they're transient. And this isn't a surprise for us. Right? We've seen this in other works. And so for Shankara, we confuse the non-eternal for the eternal. And it leads to this endless cycle of birth and death, of desire and disappointment. And so he says, man is in bondage because he mistakes what is non-Atman for his real self. This is caused by ignorance. Now here some of us might be turned off because Shankara speaks of this karmic cycle of birth and death, of rebirth. And so we think it's a preposterous idea, so we stop reading Shankara or stop listening. However, I would add that one doesn't need to look at this karmic cycle of birth and death as something literal. Instead, we can look at it metaphorically, in that if you're caught up with identifying with your worldliness, then you will continually be chasing after peace, chasing liberation through worldliness, through your senses. But ultimately, you will never find it. You'll never find the satisfaction you're looking for. You'll never find the peace that you're looking for. Because by definition of this world as being unreal, your desires are for something real. And so it would be similar to you trying to satisfy your body's hunger by eating junk food rather than real food. So then, in this sense, your whole life, by chasing after worldliness to satisfy your peace, it becomes a karmic cycle. Right? It's essentially hell. It's a living hell. So this ignorance for Shankara manifests in various ways. In one instance is we identify with the body, nourishing it, pampering it, guarding it, getting defensive when somebody insults us, believing that we are the body itself. Like, this body is me and the thoughts that I'm thinking are my thoughts. And whatever the thoughts say about myself, that becomes my identity. But for Shankara, what happens is that you lose sight of your true nature, which is Atman, the eternal self. And I've talked about the Atman and the Brahman previously in the episodes on the Bhagavad Gita. So if you want more breakdown on that, check those 2 episodes out. Now, Shankara warns us by saying, stop identifying yourself with this corruptible body. Right? He says, born of the flesh of father and mother, regarded it as impure, as though it were an outcast. Attain the goal of life by realizing your unity with Brahman. Just as man, us, might mistake a piece of rope for a snake, so too do we mistake our impermanent material identity for our true essence. And this analogy of the snake and the rope is something that he continually brings up. So the analogy of the rope and snake is this. Imagine you're walking down a street, it's dimly lit. You see a coiled snake on the side of the road. And as you approach it, you start to get fearful. You start to think that it might be a cobra, and if the cobra strikes at you, you're likely going to die. But then as you approach it and the light becomes a bit clearer and you can see better, you realize it's a rope. And when in your realization that it's a rope, your fear disappears. You are no longer terrified that you would get harmed by it. And so he says, that is like this world that we live in. This world is unreal. It's an illusion. It's like the snake that we think is there, but it's really not there. So he writes, deluded by his ignorance, a man mistakes one thing for another. Lack of discernment will cause a man to think that a snake is a piece of rope. And this is where his point about discernment becomes very important. He's saying the man of discernment is the one who can distinguish between what is real, what is unreal, what is wise, and what is foolish. But most of us are fools, not because we are stupid or dumb, but rather because we are ignorant, and by us having attached ourselves to this materiality of this world. Right? We have refused to look beyond it, to look beyond what these pleasures are pointing towards. And if you remember the episode with Plato's Symposium, the point that Socrates makes is our love of particular things in this world, say of the humans that you love and of the laws that are in place, of the cities, those are all pointing to something much greater, right? It's this ladder of love that he speaks about. And ultimately, this love of beauty. And so similarly here, all our ignorance for Shankara is caused by ignorance. And that ignorance is very easily broken. But to do that, discrimination is important. So the first step towards this liberation, as I mentioned, is discrimination. The ability to distinguish between what is real and what is unreal, what is Brahman and what is not. Discrimination is not just in Shankara's book, but is the cornerstone of many spiritual practices. But for Shankara, he emphasizes it by saying, first is mentioned discrimination between the eternal and non-eternal. Next comes the renunciation of the enjoyment of the fruits of action, and here and hereafter. Without discrimination, we remained trapped in this world of illusion, mistaking material wealth, status, sensual pleasures for lasting fulfillment, and to which Shankara says, the fool thinks I am the body, the intelligent man thinks I am an individual soul united with the body. But the wise man, in the greatness of his knowledge and the spiritual discrimination, sees the Atman as a reality and thinks, I am Brahman. This process that we're talking about, this discrimination, it leads us beyond the senses. It leads us to the world of the eternal. We begin to understand that everything around us, our bodies, our possessions, even our thoughts, they're all transient. The feelings that you have, the joy that you feel when something good happens to you, these are all transient things, because tomorrow the opposite thing can happen and then you could be completely saddened by a situation. And that only happens when you identify yourself with your body, with your thoughts, with your possessions. So he says, like a wave on the surface of the ocean, these phenomena rise and fall, but they are not the ultimate reality. And I quote, the wave, the foam, the eddy, the bubbles are all essentially water. Similarly, the body and the ego are really nothing but pure consciousness. And then he goes on to say, are jars, pots, and vessels distinct from the clay of which they are made? Man drinks the wine of Maya, Maya is illusion, becomes deluded, and begins to see things as separate from each other. So he talks of you and I. The point is, the jars and pots are all different insofar as they have different functions, they look different. But for Shankara, they're all made of the same clay. And so, ultimately, they're not really different from one another. And if so, how can you think that the other is alien, that the other is not you, that there is such a thing as true otherness? We must cultivate the habit of discerning between what is temporary or what is permanent. And this is the point that Shankara continually makes. Right? He describes that this shift in awareness, being able to discriminate between the temporary and the permanent, the eternal and the non-eternal, from the surface appearance to the underlying essence of everything, which is Brahman. He says that, and I quote, the air in a jar is one with the air everywhere. In like manner, your Atman is one with Brahman. O prudent one, lose all sense of separation and enter into silence. Again, this idea of silence reappears. And we've looked at this in multiple different episodes by multiple different sages. But briefly here, silence is crucial in our own contemplative life. If we want to discriminate between the eternal and the non-eternal, to be able to live in a world where we are wholly doing things because we are oriented towards the good, towards beauty, then to get there, you must have silence. And you must make an effort of scheduling it into your daily life, especially for us who feel that we have no time because we have family obligations, we have work responsibilities, we have different side projects we're doing. Even then, you must cultivate time for silence and ultimately a time for solitude where you can reflect. So from this, what Shankara goes on to say is, once you've discriminated between the eternal and the non-eternal, you need renunciation and self-control. And this is the true path to freedom, to liberation. This does not mean abandoning your life or your responsibilities, but rather detaching from our identification with the ego and our attachment to the fruits of our actions. Meaning we don't do good because it makes us feel good. We don't do good because we want praises from others. We simply do good because that becomes the end in itself. So Shankara defines renunciation as the following. Renunciation is the giving up of all pleasures of our eyes, the ears, and the other senses. The giving up of all objects of transitory enjoyment. The giving up of the desire for a physical body as well as for the highest kind of spirit body of a God. So he says, giving up the pleasures of the eyes. The eyes for us is the first thing that titillates us, that makes us desire more. You see a nice car, you get drawn to it. You see a beautiful woman, you get drawn to it. You see a beautiful man, you get drawn to it. And then it is our ears. It is our ears that lead us down the path of gossip, down the path of rumors. And then it is our other senses, our mouth, right? It is us speaking falsehood, us engaging in gossip. All these things, Shankara realizes, you must renounce these things. Because these are ultimately transitory enjoyments. These are things that in the moment you feel good because, you're engaging in sort of these activities, but ultimately they make you worse. And so you must give these up. True renunciation comes from the understanding that the joy we seek, the happiness that we seek from the material world are fleeting. Instead, we must train the mind to seek the eternal, according to Shankara. So I quote, to detach the mind from all objective things by continually seeing their imperfection and to direct it steadfastly toward Brahman, its goal, this is called tranquility. We must remove our attachments from this worldliness. Only then can you truly find tranquility. And I quote, external attachment is attachment to sense objects. Internal attachment is self-identification. The dispassionate man, absorbingly devoted to Brahman, is alone able to renounce both. So let's look at this a bit more. External attachment is your animalistic pleasure-seeking man, right? It's your lower man. So then internal attachment, he says, is self-identification. And this is you thinking that this body is you, that the thoughts that you're thinking are you, and that the praises that you receive, that defines who you are, right? It's more abstract in that it's more about, say, status seeking vanity. These are internal attachments that become self-identifications. And so for Shankara, the dispassionate man, meaning the wise man, he alone is able to renounce both because he sees both of them as transient. They're ephemeral, they are vanity, right? And Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, which we looked at in a previous episode, that's his whole point. He says, vanity, oh vanity, all is vanity. And this is coming from a man who's done everything he can under the sun to find pleasure, but he realizes all this worldliness is vanity. And here Shankara says the same thing. The wise man is able to renounce both. The tranquility that he speaks about is essential, as it is uncontrolled desires that bind us, that make us a slave to the wheel of birth and death, this karmic cycle that I mentioned earlier. It is our lusts that binds us to this, that prevents us from seeing the true nature of reality. And I quote, "The more a man satisfies his cravings in the objective world, the more his cravings will increase. But if he controls them and ceases to gratify them, the seeds of cravings will be destroyed. Therefore, let him gain self-control." We live in a world of deception where we think that if we have more things, then it will make us happier. If we have more money, it'll make us happier. If we have more whatever it is, it will make us better, it'll make us happier, it'll make us give us more peace. But this is all a lie. And this is what Shankara is saying. The more you satisfy, quote unquote, the cravings in this objective world, in this unreal world, to be accurate, the more the cravings increase, because you'll quickly realize it's a rat race and you cannot get off the wheel and go until at the very end, when you're completely tired and you cannot run anymore, you fall off and realize this whole thing has been an illusion, and you die regretting your decisions. Shankara's point is nothing will satisfy you. It is only the wise man who controls his senses and ceases to gratify them that the seeds of craving will be destroyed. And that is the key to self-control. The key to self-control is knowing how to destroy the seed of craving. So Shankara warns that a life lived in pursuit of this rat race, the desire, the lust, only leads to suffering. And I quote, "When craving grows stronger, self-control is lost. When self-control is lost, craving grows stronger than ever. A man who lives thus will never escape the wheel of birth and death." Again, the cravings grow stronger, your self-control is lost. When your self-control is lost, your craving get even stronger. So then we, as I mentioned earlier, you can never escape this metaphorical karmic cycle. You essentially live in hell, but you do not realize it until the very end of your life. And then it might be too late. So Buddha says very similar things in the Dhammapada. Jesus also says very similar things when he tells us in the Gospel of Matthew, and I quote, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." We cannot be attached to this world, and that is the essence of this. Otherwise, we'll be like the cave dwellers from Plato's Republic, the people who are sitting there thinking that the shadows are real, when in fact the true world, the eternal world, is outside the cave, but they think the cave is real. Or we're like the man who runs to the mirage thinking that it will quench his thirst, when it's only just the desert. And he will be scooping up sand into his mouth. And the more sand he scoops into his mouth, the thirstier he gets. But he thinks that the more he does it, at one point it will quench his thirst, but it will just kill him. So Shankara goes on to say that we must burn these cravings, otherwise we will be bound to this birth and death cycle. And it is through renunciation and self-control that we burn the cravings and dissolve the ego. And I quote, "The ego is your enemy. It is like a thorn stuck in the throat of an eater." If you've ever had the pleasure of eating fish that has bones, the tiny, tiny bones in there, and you accidentally swallow a bone and it gets jammed into your throat, it's very annoying. And so he says, that is what your ego is like. It prevents you from eating properly. It prevents you from the proper functioning of your throat, because there's something stuck there, something that's causing you constant pain. And the only way to get rid of this in this situation is to remove the thorn that is stuck in your throat. And so we get into this point that the ego is the source of our bondage. For Shankara, the ego is created, and I quote, when a man's mind is overpowered by extreme ignorance. And then he goes on to say, all right, man's life of bondage to the world of birth and death has many causes. The root of them all is ego, and the first begotten child of ignorance. The ego is the root of suffering. And Shankara makes it clear, as long as we identify with the ego, we remain trapped in the cycle of ignorance, of desire, and of suffering. And he says it is the first begotten child of ignorance, of Maya. It is what makes you a slave to this karmic cycle. The ego creates the illusion of separateness, leading us to believe that we are isolated individuals, unconnected from the whole. The illusion then continues to strengthen. And so what the illusion does is it reinforces our attachments to the material world and makes liberation extremely difficult. Because the more attached you become, the more you suffer, and you think that the way to alleviate your suffering is by more attachments. By thinking that if you have more things, if you satisfy your lust for more power, more fame, more vanity, that somehow it'll heal the damage that those things have already caused. But that's a lie. So Shankara writes, the sense of ego must also be unreal, since we observe how it comes and goes. But we are conscious also of being the witness, the knower of everything. So now at this point, what Shankara is talking about is the Atman. Right? We are conscious of the ego. So then if you're conscious of the ego, that means you cannot be the ego. So I continue. But we are conscious also of being the witness, the knower of everything. This consciousness does not belong to the ego sense and the other perceptions which exist only for a moment at a time. The Atman is the witness of the ego and the rest. It is present always, even in deep sleep. And this is the key to the liberation that Shankara talks about. It is understanding the ego is not yourself, not identifying with what he calls the gross body, which is this body, the body that you and I are in, but understanding that your true self is the Atman, is the witnessing of the ego, the one who can objectively look at the things that you're doing and say, this is my ego doing these things. And so he says, and so Shankara uses the metaphor of a lamp to describe how the Atman illuminates all phenomena without being affected by them, meaning it shines light on where your attachments are without being attached to those things. And his point is, be like a lamp in a room. If you've ever entered a room and it's dark and you have a lamp in the corner, you turn on that lamp, it shines light, but the room itself never affects the lamp. Right? The light simply just shines. So he writes, the properties of the objects observed do not affect the witness who stand apart from them without attachment. In the same manner, the properties of the room do not affect the lamp which reveals them, meaning the room. So he goes on to give the example at this point when he talks about two men seeing a mirage. He says, look, the illumined man, the one who has seen the light, the one who is liberated, when he sees the mirage in the desert, realizes it's an illusion, and so he turns away and goes off. But the ignorant man, he doesn't realize it's a mirage and he runs towards it to try to quench his thirst. And so I quote, illumination causes a man to turn away from the evil and the unreal. Attachment to these is the result of ignorance. So when you see the good, when you see the eternal, the truth, the real, then you turn away from evil because you realize the evil, right, the unreal, the attachments to this world. This are all transient things, and they are a distraction in that they are keeping you chained to the unreal world. And that's why he says attachment to these things is the result of ignorance. But the problem is we are blinded by our insatiable thirst for more. We look at our world and everything is continually trying to get our attention to buy more things, to do more things, to have more experiences. And like fools who have uncontrolled passions, which the lower man, the dragon, right, the beasts in us, they are controlling our ego. So we continually enter this cycle of wanting more, desiring more, thinking that somehow it's going to satisfy us. Right? And we are like the man running to the mirage for a drink. But Shankara warns us this will lead to death. And not just death in the literal sense, but death in the death of you. You will be unable to discern the truth of all of this. Right? He calls it, the book is called Crest Jewel of Discrimination, because the crest jewel is realizing what the real and unreal is. That is what the discrimination and discernment leads to. So he writes about the man, the person who is liberated, who is fully aware. And I quote, "He is fully conscious, but free from any craving. Such a man is said to be free, even in this life." The bliss of realizing Brahman, ultimate reality, leads to the liberation from the cycle of birth and death. When the ego is dissolved through discrimination, and then from discrimination through renunciation and self-control, Shankara says, we then attain the highest goal of life, which is liberation. And he describes the liberated soul as one who has transcended dualities, right, remaining indifferent to both pleasure and pain. And this sounds very similar to the episode we've done on Heraclitus. So Shankara writes, good and evil fortune may come. He's speaking about the wise man, the one who's liberated, regards them both with indifference and remains unaffected by either. This is how you may know the man who is free even in this life. And he goes on to say, when the mind, thus purged of ceaseless meditation, is merged in Brahman, the state of samadhi is attained, and in that state there is no sense of duality. Samadhi is nirvana. Samadhi is having a direct experience of Brahman. And it is through, he says, purging by ceaseless meditation. And you realize that the multiplicities, these are all illusions, and that ultimately there is no duality, there's only oneness. This is what Shankara goes on to say. The one who realizes Brahman, for Shankara, knows that the material world is a dream, and when he wakes from this dream, all his previous attachment finally fades away. And in this sense, all of it just fades away just like that. So he tells us, and I'm quoting, so when you wake up from this dream, well, all your previous attachments and actions and desires, they simply fade away. They're gone. You lose your attachments to them. And in this state, the soul, your soul, no longer identifies, the Atman, I should say, with the body or the ego, but remains eternally conscious of its oneness with Brahman. And so he writes, the illumined soul lives eternally conscious of his oneness with Brahman. And this is why, and I quote again, he is no longer troubled by the thought of I and mine. Such are the characteristics of a man who is free in this life. It is as if you're in a bad dream, and in this dream you're being chased by a tiger, and you're fearing for your life, so you run and run as fast as you can. And this tiger continues to inch closer and closer, and finally you stumble, and you turn as you stumble and look up, and you see this tiger jumping up, and he comes and bites into your face. But then it wakes you up from this dream, and you realize it's all been a dream, and all your fears of dying, of being eaten by the lions are gone. However, the fear that you experience in the dream is real. You sensed it, but in reality, it was in the dream world. And there was no lion attacking you, even though the senses that you felt were real. And so similarly, with Shankara, he's saying, once you realize that this world is an illusion, all of this fear, all of your attachments will simply fade, just like you are waking up from a bad dream and realize that whatever was happening in the dream was not real, and that this world is real. So Shankara assures us that liberation can be attained in this life, but only by those who possess the ability to discriminate between the real and unreal. And I quote, "Who is called wise? He who can discriminate between the real and unreal." And from here, once you're liberated, the bliss of Brahman surpasses all the worldly pleasures, because the worldly pleasures, they are pointing to Brahman, just like in Plato's Ladder of Love. All of these love of that you have are pointing to the eternal beauty. And I quote here from Crest Jewel of Discrimination, "The fruits of this passion is illumination. The fruit of illumination is the stilling of desire. The fruit of still desire is the experience of the bliss of Atman, whence follows peace." So now what I'll do is I'm going to reread the opening excerpt. And like I mentioned in the beginning, the excerpts are essentially at the end of the book, and this is not in any particular order of the questions that appear. There are a bunch of questions that Shankara responds to and gives answers for. And so I'm going to read them. "Who is called wise? He who can discriminate between the real and unreal. What is to be feared? To become possessed by your own wealth. What deludes a man like an intoxicating drink? Attachment to the objects of the senses. Who is a loser? He who is proud. What is the most difficult task for a man? To keep his mind under constant control. Who is bound? He who is attached to worldliness. Who is free? He who is dispassionate. What is the gate to hell? Lust. Who lives in happiness? He who has attained samadhi. Who is awake? He who discriminates between right and wrong. How can one be liberated? By attaining the knowledge of Brahman. Who are our enemies? Our sense organs, when they are uncontrolled. Who are our friends? Our sense organs, when they are controlled. Who is poor? He who is greedy. Who is blind? He who is lustful. Who has overcome the world? He who has conquered his own mind. Who is poor? He who is not contented. Who is awake? He who practices discrimination. Who is asleep? He who lives in ignorance. What is man's best ornament? His good character. So the 3 challenges for this week is 1, practice discrimination. Right? Cultivate the ability to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the eternal and the non-eternal. To not become attached to the worldliness, to the temptations of this world in our consumeristic society. And then the second thing is develop renunciation. Detach from ego identification and attachment to the fruits of your actions. Right? This doesn't mean, like I said, abandoning your responsibilities, but rather changing your perspective on them and seeing that you do your responsibilities, you do your actions, you do your duties because it is for the good. And you detach from your ego by realizing that the ego is not yourself. That you can have this conversation within your own mind and realize that the things that you think you want might actually be driven by the ego and not the Atman. And finally, exercise self-control. And I think this is the foundation of it. To train the mind to seek after that which is good, that which is eternal, that which is not temporary pleasure seeking. Control your cravings and your desires in the small things of life, and those small things will compound and allow you to then finally break free from the cycle of birth and death. And with that, I'll wrap. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I appreciate you. This is episode 50, so that's incredible. And thank you to all my supporters, to the paying members, to non-paying members, to you, you're listening to it. Thank you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. Until next week, peace.